I'm Rick Morris, and these videos are a journey towards our purpose, to find our purpose and our destiny. Today, we're on step 17, episode 4, and the title is Refuge. I'm going to tell you a little story. It's going to expose my humanity, uh, but it illustrates something I want to say. When I was in college, well, we were young and weren't using our full cerebral abilities. And we were at a lake. We were drinking beer, and we were jumping off cliff into the lake. And it wasn't the smartest thing to do, but my future brother-in-law hurt his back. He hit some rock. He didn't get out far enough, and he hit some rocks. I don't know exactly how it happened, but he hurt his back. So we decided to drive 30 miles to the hospital in a bigger city, and I jumped in his car. He got in the back seat with his laying down because his back was hurting, and his bare feet were sticking out of the back window. Now you have to realize he had an old Chevrolet car, and I was driving it, and we were headed for the hospital, and the rest of our friends were in cars behind us. It's like a long caravan. Anyway, I put the pedal to the metal, and I was probably doing 80 miles an hour. I don't know, pretty fast. And driving along, and highway patrolman, Texas highway patrolman, turned his lights on and pulled me over. Well, this old car, the inside lever didn't work on the door, and so I had to reach out my window and open it from the outside. And I went back to meet the officer, and he came up and looked in the car, and he saw my brother-in-law all laid out in the back seat. And he checked my license and the whole 9 yards. And he said, Morris, I'm going to have to give you a ticket for you were doing 84 and a 65-mile-an-hour speed limit. And I said, well, sir, my brother-in-law hurt his back at the lake, and I was taking him to the hospital. It's an emergency. And he said, well, sign the ticket, and I'll take you to the hospital, and we'll go safely to the hospital, and I'll lead the way. And I said, this is in my young arrogance. And I said, I'm not signing any ticket. I felt like I was in the right. And he said, well, come get in my car. We're going to jail. And I said, well, what about my brother-in-law? And he said, well, we'll send an ambulance after him. And about that time, my friends started catching up with me, and one of them offered to take him to the hospital. And so the policeman had me in his car, and he took off, and he had a trainee in there with him, and so he was trying to handle everything by the book. So we rode along a little while, and I started trying to reason with him about my brother-in-law being hurt, and he said, I'd advise you to keep your mouth shut because I can smell alcohol on your breath. And at that point, I realized I better shut my mouth or I'm going to get deeper than what I want here. So I went with the officer. Anyway, turned out okay. He did take me to the jailhouse, but they didn't book me. And before I called my brother, and he got me out. And I thought about it, and it was in one of those sessions of my life where I learned something. Anyway, we're going to talk about refuge. Taking God's refuge is what I should have done. I should have done the right thing and God would have helped me and protected me. But that was before I know what I know now. Anyway, step 17 states we are in anticipation for what God has for us because we love Him. Now, I've selected two scriptures for today. The first one is, the Lord repay you for what you have done, and the full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. The second verse is, whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and He will repay him for his deed. That's Proverbs 19:17. That first one was Ruth 2:5. So God takes notice when we're generous to the poor, or when we take care of widows and orphans. He offers refuge and considers our generosity an IOU. Wow, that's that first verse. Let me read that again. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, whose wings you have come to take refuge. Ruth 2:5. So, when we're generous to the poor, or we take care of widows and orphans, it's considered generosity, and it's considered a loan to God, and He offers us an IOU. Can you wrap your head around lending to the Lord? What banker would ask for collateral for a loan to the Lord? I would venture to say it would be a signature loan. His name, God is good for it. If we give a poor family a turkey at Thanksgiving, or we donate a sofa to an orphanage, how do you think God would repay that loan? Well, it's doubtful He would repay in cash, though it's possible. It depends on what we need. When we take refuge under His wing, He's like a mother hen protecting her chicks. We might need a healing from cancer we don't even know about. We may need a breakthrough for a loved one. We may be looking for an open door to enter our destiny. He knows what we need. This whole concept makes us open our spiritual eyes to look around for people who are down and they need a hand to get back up. A pure heart will do a good deed anonymously. That way only God sees, and we're not seeing it. We're not doing a good deed to get another man's approval. So we begin to look at things through spiritual eyes. Seeing the world that way is seeing the world as God sees it. We have to come up higher to do that. We don't look at everything from a selfish perspective like I did in my college days. It's not all about me. Some examples make this concept clear. A married man who truly loves his wife sees a very attractive woman. In his old selfish perspective, he would struggle with lust in his mind. However, when he sees her in God's perspective, he says to himself, that's a beautiful woman who's married to someone else. God bless her and bless her husband today. And that's a totally different perspective than he would have had in the old days. When he sees her as God sees her, it changes everything. When he brings God into this perspective, suddenly his thoughts become holy. The thought of lust at the same time of thinking of God's perspective is abhorrent to him. The ugly, lustful thought cannot coexist with seeing her as God's creation. Let's take another example. Another example involves a boss who is difficult to work for. He pushes issues that are, in your opinion, are over the top. He tells you to confront people when you think it's unnecessary. In your mind, it's really not good business. When you ask him to soften it a bit, he disagrees. You find yourself just not telling him about issues because you dread his response. What changes if you look at it from God's perspective? Well, God's perspective is, first of all, my boss is my authority. When I deal with customers, employees, or contractors, I'm representing him. He answers to God, not to me. When I judge him and I hide things from him, then it becomes my issue right here, not his. When I look at it from God's perspective, I obey my boss and I do things his way, not my way. Suddenly our relationship changes. Well, it may not be suddenly, but over time, when he sees that I'm doing things exactly the way he would do them, our relationship changes because my boss realizes he can trust me. God can deal with his heart because I'm not in the way. The curious thing is, my boss may have the key to my door to my destiny. Wow, that makes things look totally different. When I look at the issues of life from God's perspective, I realize God is my refuge. You give these things some thought, and we're going to go on to the next episode.